On a humid morning in June 2002, in a small Louisiana parish where Spanish moss draped from ancient oaks and the air hung thick with moisture, a young woman named Melissa Doucet walked out of her modest home on Bayou Road and never returned. She was 23 years old, a mother of 2 small children, a daughter, a friend to many in the tight-knit community of St. Martin Parish. Her car was found 3 days later, abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 15 miles from home, keys still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat, a half-empty bottle of sweet tea in the cup holder. There was no sign of struggle, no witnesses, no body. For 20 years her family waited. Her children grew up with a ghost for a mother. And the man who claimed to love her most continued his life as though nothing had happened. But someone knew. Someone always knows. The question that haunted investigators for 2 decades was simple and terrible. How do you prove what everyone suspects when the evidence has vanished into the Louisiana swamps? St. Martin Parish sits in the heart of Cajun country, a landscape of winding bayous and sugarcane fields that stretch toward horizons blurred by heat and humidity. The town of Breaux Bridge, where Melissa Doucet lived, counted just over 7,000 souls in 2002. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where families had roots going back generations, where Sunday church services were social events and Friday night football games drew the whole community. Main Street held a handful of storefronts, a diner that served boudin and crawfish etouffee, a hardware store, a small pharmacy where locals gathered to exchange news and gossip. The Teche Bayou ran through the town like a dark artery, its waters reflecting cypress trees and carrying the accumulated secrets of centuries. Melissa had grown up here, attended the local high school, worked at the elementary school cafeteria. She had married young, at 19, to a man named Derek Landry. Derek was 25 then, a mechanic who worked at his uncle's auto shop on the edge of town. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and an easy smile that made people trust him. They had 2 children quickly, a daughter, Emma, born in 1999, and a son, Tyler, born in 2001. They lived in a small house Derek's family owned, a white clapboard structure with a sagging porch and a yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. Neighbors would later describe them as a normal couple, though some noticed tension. Melissa's sister would recall that her younger sibling seemed increasingly withdrawn, that she had mentioned wanting to go back to school, to do something more with her life. Derek, some said, preferred his wife at home. The morning of June 14th began like countless others. The sun rose at 6:17, already promising heat. Cicadas buzzed in the trees. The air smelled of cut grass and the distant sweetness of sugarcane. Melissa woke early, fed the children breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast prepared in the small kitchen, while the radio played Zydeco music softly. Emma, 3 years old then, sat in her high chair pushing food around her plate. Tyler, just 13 months, babbled and banged a spoon against the tray. Derek had left for work at 5:30, as he did most mornings. The auto shop opened at 6. He had kissed Melissa goodbye. She had been wearing a yellow nightgown, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. This detail would come from Derek himself, repeated to investigators, to family, to anyone who asked. He remembered everything about that morning, everything. Around 9:30, according to what Derek would later tell investigators, Melissa called him at the shop. She said she needed to run to the store. Would he mind if she dropped the kids with his mother for an hour? He said sure, of course. His mother, Rita Landry, lived just 2 miles away on Highway 31. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. Derek would recall that Melissa sounded normal, maybe a little distracted. He heard Tyler crying in the background. She said she would see him at dinner. She said she loved him. He said he loved her too. These were the last words Derek Landry claimed to have heard from his wife, but Melissa never arrived at Rita Landry's house. And here is where the story begins to unravel, slowly, like thread pulled from old cloth. Clear's throat, Rita Landry would tell deputies that she waited all morning. She had cleared space in the living room for the children to play, had turned on the television to a cartoon channel, had set out snacks. When noon came and went with no sign of Melissa, she called the auto shop. Derek answered, sounded surprised. He said Melissa should have been there hours ago. He left work immediately, drove home. The house was empty. Melissa's car was gone. The children's diaper bag sat on the kitchen counter, packed and ready. A bottle of formula stood next to it. The breakfast dishes were washed and drying in the rack. Everything was neat, orderly. The only thing out of place was Melissa herself. Derek called the sheriff's department at 1:15 that afternoon. The dispatcher took the information calmly. A missing woman, gone a few hours, no signs of trouble. It was not yet alarming. People went places, forgot to call, had misunderstandings. The dispatcher said to wait a few more hours, see if she turned up. Derek called Melissa's mother, Frances Doucet, who lived in a neighboring parish. Frances had not heard from her daughter that morning. She immediately got in her car and drove to Breaux Bridge. By 3 in the afternoon, family members were gathering at the house on Bayou Road, calling Melissa's friends, checking with the few stores in town. No one had seen her. The St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office officially opened a missing persons case at 6:30 that evening, when it became clear that Melissa Doucet Landry was not simply delayed or forgetful. Deputies began the methodical work of tracing her last known movements. They interviewed Derek multiple times that first night. He sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, face pale, answering every question. He repeated the phone call, the plan to drop the kids with his mother, his assumption that Melissa would be back for dinner. He showed them the phone, pointed to the call log. There it was, incoming call from home number 9:32 a.m., duration 2 minutes 14 seconds. Everything Derek said checked out. He seemed devastated, bewildered, cooperative. Deputies found no reason to doubt him. The search began in earnest the next morning, June 15th. Volunteers gathered at the community center before dawn. Someone brought coffee in large thermoses. Someone else set up folding tables with maps of the parish. The sheriff, a man named Gerald Broussard who had held the position for 15 years, organized teams to search the roads, the bayous, the vast stretches of sugarcane fields that surrounded the town. They worked in groups of 6, walking grid patterns, calling Melissa's name. The temperature climbed into the 90s by 10 a.m. Humidity made the air feel like breathing through wet cotton. Mosquitoes swarmed from the standing water in ditches. The searchers pressed on. On the third day, June 17th, a grocery store manager in Opelousas, a town 15 miles northeast of Breaux Bridge, called the sheriff's office. There was a car in his parking lot that had been there for days, a blue Honda Civic with St. Martin Parish plates. Deputies arrived within the hour. The license plate matched Melissa's car. The vehicle was unlocked. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside, $73 in cash, credit cards, driver's license with her photo staring out. Her cell phone was in the center console, battery depleted. A bottle of sweet tea, still a quarter full, sat in the cup holder. The keys dangled from the ignition. Crime scene technicians processed the vehicle meticulously. They dusted for fingerprints, found only Melissa's and Derek's. They collected the tea bottle, the purse, the phone. They examined the interior for blood, hair, fibers, any sign of violence. They found nothing. The car was clean, ordinary, abandoned. It told them almost nothing except that Melissa had been here, in this parking lot, and then she had not. Deputies canvassed the shopping center and surrounding businesses. A cashier at the grocery store thought she might have seen a woman matching Melissa's description 3 days earlier, mid-morning, but she could not be certain. No one else remembered anything. The investigation turned to reconstructing those missing hours. Melissa had left home sometime after 9:30 a.m. The drive from her house to the Opelousas grocery store took approximately 23 minutes via Highway 31. If she left immediately after calling Derek, she would have arrived around 10 a.m. But why Opelousas? There were closer stores. There was a grocery in Bro Bridge itself. When investigators asked Derek if his wife had any reason to drive to Opelousas that day, he shook his head slowly. He said she usually shopped locally. He said he could not think of any reason for her to go there. Clear as throat. Those who knew him said Derek seemed genuinely confused, genuinely worried. He participated in every search, spent long days walking through brush and heat, calling Melissa's name until his voice went hoarse. He gave multiple interviews to local television stations, pleading for information, for his wife's safe return. He stood in front of cameras with his mother beside him, holding photos of Melissa, asking anyone who had seen her to come forward. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn with exhaustion and stress. The community rallied around him. Church groups brought meals. Neighbors sat with him in the evenings. Everyone believed Derek Landry was a man whose wife had vanished, a victim of circumstance or foul play by unknown hands. But some investigators were beginning to notice small things. Deputy Claire Hebert, who had conducted several of the interviews with Derek, noted in her report that his timeline was almost too precise. He remembered exact times, exact words from phone conversations, exact details about Melissa's clothing and mood. When people are genuinely in shock, Deputy Hebert would later explain, their memories are often fragmented, uncertain. Derek's were crystalline. She also noted that he never asked certain questions. He never asked if there had been other cars in the parking lot where Melissa's was found. He never asked about whether her phone showed any calls or messages after she left home. He never asked about the mileage on her car. The mileage troubled investigators. The odometer showed that Melissa's car had been driven approximately 47 miles since its last recorded service, which had been 2 days before her disappearance. The distance from the Landry home to the Opelousas grocery store and back was 46 miles round trip. But Melissa had not come back. So where had those extra miles come from? Had she driven somewhere else first? Had someone else driven the car? The small discrepancy nagged at deputies like a splinter under skin. They examined Derek's story more closely. He said he had been at work all morning, from 5:30 a.m. until he left after his mother called at noon. His uncle, who owned the auto shop, confirmed Derek had arrived on time, had been working on a transmission job. But the shop had no security cameras, no time cards, no way to verify Derek's presence every single minute of those 6.5 hours. The shop sat on a rural road, separated from the nearest neighbor by a quarter-mile of trees and fields. Derek could have left, could have been gone for an hour or more, and no one would necessarily have noticed. Investigators obtained phone records. Melissa's cell phone showed the call to Derek at 9:32 a.m., just as he had said. But there was another detail. The call had been placed from a cell tower near their home. However, Melissa's phone showed no activity after that call. It was as if the device had been turned off or the battery had died. Yet the phone found in her car still held a partial charge when deputies tested it 3 days later. Why would the battery have been depleted on the morning she disappeared, but partially charged when found? Deputies asked Derek to take a polygraph examination. He agreed immediately, without hesitation. He sat in a windowless room at the sheriff's office on June 25th, 2 weeks after Melissa's disappearance, and answered questions while sensors monitored his physiological responses. Did you harm your wife? No. Do you know where your wife is? No. Did you have anything to do with your wife's disappearance? No. The examiner, a state police specialist brought in from Baton Rouge, reviewed the results and reported that Derek showed deception on 2 questions: whether he knew where his wife was, and whether he had argued with her on the morning she disappeared. When confronted with these results, Derek became upset. He said the test was wrong, that he was stressed and exhausted, that of course he was showing signs of anxiety because his wife was missing. He maintained he had told the truth about everything. But the polygraph results shifted something in the investigation. Sheriff Broussard, who had initially been sympathetic to Derek, now looked at him with new eyes. Deputies interviewed neighbors again, asking different questions. Had they heard arguments from the Landry house? Had they noticed any tension between Derek and Melissa? Slowly, a different picture began to emerge. A neighbor 2 houses down said she had heard raised voices from the Landry home several times in recent months, though she could not make out words. Melissa's coworkers at the school cafeteria said she had seemed quieter lately, had sometimes appeared tired or sad. One friend, a woman named Jennifer Thibodeaux, who had known Melissa since high school, told deputies that Melissa had confided she was thinking about leaving Derek. She said Melissa felt trapped, felt like Derek controlled everything in her life, where she went, who she saw, how she spent money. Jennifer said Melissa had been afraid of how Derek would react if she asked for separation. This information was significant, but it was not evidence. Suspicion is not proof. The sheriff's office continued investigating, continued searching, but as weeks turned into months, the case grew cold. There was no body, no crime scene, no witnesses, no confession. Derek Landry hired a lawyer, stopped cooperating with interviews. He maintained his innocence through the lawyer's statements. The community remained divided. Some believed Derek was guilty, that he had done something terrible and hidden it well. Others believed he was an innocent man, unfairly suspected, enduring a nightmare not of his making. By the fall of 2002, the active search for Melissa Doucet had effectively ended. Her case file remained open, sitting in a cabinet at the sheriff's office alongside other unsolved disappearances and deaths. Her family held a memorial service in September, though they did not use the word funeral. To have a funeral, you need a body. You need closure. They had neither. Clears throat. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the sick uncertainty of not knowing whether to trust your own instincts, you may understand what Melissa's family endured in the years that followed. Her mother, Frances, became consumed with finding answers. She created missing person flyers, posted them across Louisiana and into neighboring states. She called the sheriff's office weekly, then daily, demanding updates, demanding action. She hired a private investigator with money she did not have, taking out loans, selling possessions. The investigator found nothing new. Frances's health deteriorated. She developed high blood pressure, suffered from insomnia, lost weight. In 2005, she had a minor stroke. Doctors said stress was a contributing factor. Derek Landry moved away from Breaux Bridge in the spring of 2003, less than a year after Melissa's disappearance. He took Emma and Tyler to Lake Charles, a city on the western edge of Louisiana, 3 hours from St. Martin Parish. He told family he needed a fresh start, needed to get away from the whispers and stares. His mother, Rita, moved with him, helped care for the children. Derek found work at another auto shop. He rented a house in a neighborhood where no one knew his story. He enrolled Emma in preschool. He pushed Tyler in a stroller through parks. To outside observers, he was a single father doing his best, a man whose wife had left or died or vanished, adapting to circumstances beyond his control. But inside that house, things were not right. Rita Landry would later tell investigators that she noticed changes in Derek. He was short-tempered, irritable. He drank more than he used to, beer in the evenings turning into whiskey late at night. He had nightmares. She could hear him through the walls, thrashing in bed, sometimes crying out. She asked him what he dreamed about. He never answered. She noticed that he never spoke Melissa's name. If Emma or Tyler mentioned their mother, Derek would change the subject immediately, redirect the conversation. He kept no photos of Melissa in the house. It was as if she had never existed. Emma and Tyler grew up with fragments of memory and gaping absence. Emma had been 3 when her mother disappeared, old enough to retain impressions, sensations, a feeling of loss she could not articulate. She remembered her mother's voice singing lullabies, remembered being held, remembered a yellow nightgown and dark hair. As she grew older, she drew pictures in school. Teachers noticed a pattern. Emma drew families with missing figures, houses with people standing outside them, never inside. When teachers gently asked about her drawings, Emma would say she was waiting for someone. When they asked who, she said her mama. But she did not know where her mama was. No one had told her. Tyler had been too young to remember anything. His mother was an abstraction, a story told by grandmother Rita, a face in a photograph Francis would show him during rare visits. He called Rita Mama for years before understanding that she was actually his grandmother, before learning that his real mother had vanished when he was barely more than a baby. The knowledge, when it came, was confusing and painful. He asked Derek questions. Derek told him his mother had gone away. Tyler asked where. Derek said he did not know. Tyler asked if she was coming back. Derek said probably not. In 2008, when Emma was 9 and Tyler was 7, Derek met a woman named Paula Guidry. Paula worked as a dental hygienist in Lake Charles. She was divorced, had a teenage son from her previous relationship. She and Derek began seeing each other casually, dinners and movies, eventually spending weekends together. By 2009, Paula had moved into Derek's house. Emma and Tyler now had a stepmother, though Derek and Paula never formally wed. Paula was kind to the children, patient, loving in the way of someone who genuinely cared. She asked Derek about Melissa only once, early in their relationship. He told her his wife had left and never returned, that he assumed she had started a new life somewhere. He said it with such flatness, such absence of emotion, that Paula never brought it up again. But children notice things adults try to hide. Tyler, in particular, became watchful, quiet, observant beyond his years. He noticed that Derek never wanted to visit St. Martin Parish, never wanted to see extended family from Melissa's side. He noticed that Derek's hands would shake sometimes, that he would stare out windows for long periods without speaking. He noticed the drinking, the nightmares, the way Derek would flinch at certain sounds or words. Tyler did not yet understand what these observations meant. He simply filed them away, accumulated them, like pieces of a puzzle he would one day assemble. The breaking point came in October 2015. Tyler was 14, in 9th grade, struggling with identity and anger, and the complicated grief of losing a mother he never really knew. He and Derek had been arguing more frequently. Small things escalated quickly. Derek's temper, always present but usually controlled, was fraying. One evening, Tyler came home an hour late from school. Derek was waiting in the kitchen, 3 beers already consumed. He demanded to know where Tyler had been. Tyler said he had been at a friend's house. Derek said he was lying. The argument intensified. Derek grabbed Tyler by the arm, hard enough to leave marks. Tyler jerked away, shouted something he had been holding inside for years. He said, "You did something to my mother." The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek's face went white, then red. He denied it, voice rising. Tyler persisted. He said everyone knew, everyone suspected, that Derek was the reason Melissa was gone. Paula, hearing the shouting, came into the kitchen, tried to calm them both. Derek turned on her, told her to stay out of it, that she did not understand. Tyler pushed past them both and locked himself in his room. That night, Paula called Rita and asked her to come get the children for a few days. She said Derek needed time to cool down, that the house was too tense. Rita picked up Emma and Tyler the next morning. As they drove back to her small apartment, Tyler sat in the back seat and stared out the window. Finally, he spoke. He told his grandmother that he thought Derek had hurt Melissa. He said he had nightmares too, dreams where he saw things he should not remember because he had been too young. He described a yellow nightgown, a dark bayou, the sound of crying. Rita's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She asked Tyler what he meant. He said he did not know exactly, just that he felt something, knew something, in a way he could not explain. Rita did something then that she would later say she should have done 13 years earlier. She called the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office. She asked to speak to someone about Melissa Doucet's disappearance. She said her grandson had information. The detective who took the call was a woman named Angela Romero. Detective Romero had joined the sheriff's office in 2010, 8 years after Melissa vanished. She had reviewed the cold case file, had noted the suspicions about Derek Landry, the failed polygraph, the circumstantial inconsistencies. She had wanted to reopen the investigation but had no new evidence, no new leads. A call from Derek's own mother, speaking on behalf of Derek's son, was exactly what she needed. Detective Romero drove to Lake Charles the following week. She met with Rita and Tyler in a neutral location, a public library conference room. She recorded the conversation. Tyler, nervous and pale, told her everything he could remember or thought he remembered. He described fragments: being in a car seat, being driven somewhere dark, hearing his father's voice and his mother's voice, hearing crying or shouting. He could not be certain what was real memory and what was imagination or dream, but he was certain of his feeling. He believed his father had been involved in his mother's disappearance. Detective Romero asked careful questions. She showed Tyler photos of locations around St. Martin Parish, asked if anything looked familiar. He pointed to one image, a remote area along Bayou Teche, a place where the water was deep and dark and surrounded by dense vegetation. He said he dreamed about that place. He said he felt his mother was there. This was not evidence that would stand up in court. A teenager's feelings and fragmented dreams were not proof of anything. But Detective Romero believed they were worth investigating. She assembled a team. In November 2015, divers from the Louisiana State Police Underwater Recovery Unit descended into the indicated section of Bayou Teche. The water was murky, visibility almost zero. They worked by feel, searching the bottom, sweeping through silt and vegetation. On the third day, they found something. 20 feet down, wedged between cypress roots and half buried in mud, was a large canvas duffel bag weighted with cinder blocks. The divers brought it carefully to the surface. When they opened it on the bank, they found human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what investigators had suspected for 13 years. The remains were those of Melissa Doucet Landry. Dental records matched. DNA extracted from bone marrow matched samples from her children. She had been wrapped in a tarp, placed in the duffel bag, weighed down and submerged. The medical examiner determined cause of death was blunt force head wound, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. She had been deceased for approximately 13 years, which aligned with her disappearance in June 2002. Clears throat. On December 8, 2015, Detective Angela Romero and 2 state police investigators drove to Lake Charles with an arrest warrant. They arrived at Derek Landry's house at 6 a.m. Derek answered the door in pajama pants and a t-shirt, squinting against the morning light. Detective Romero identified herself, informed Derek he was under arrest for the taking of life of Melissa Doucet Landry. Derek's face went blank. He did not ask questions. He did not protest. He simply said quietly, "I want a lawyer." They placed him in handcuffs and led him to the police vehicle while Paula watched from the doorway, hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The arrest made immediate headlines across Louisiana. Local news stations showed footage of Derek being escorted into the St. Martin Parish jail. The community of Breaux Bridge, which had never forgotten Melissa Doucet, erupted with reactions. Some people said they had known all along that Derek had always seemed guilty. Others expressed shock, said they could not believe it, that Derek had seemed like a good father, a decent man. Frances Doucet, now 67 years old and in declining health, spoke to reporters from her home. She said, and these were her exact words, "I always knew my daughter did not leave those babies by choice. I always knew someone took her from us. Now maybe she can rest and maybe we can too." Derek Landry was held without bond. His lawyer, a public defender named Thomas Arsenault, maintained Derek's innocence. The trial began in September 2016, 14 years after Melissa's disappearance, 9 months after her body was found. The prosecution built their case methodically. They presented the timeline discrepancies, the mileage inconsistencies, the failed polygraph. They presented evidence that Derek and Melissa's relationship had been troubled, that Derek was controlling, that Melissa had expressed desire to leave. They presented testimony from Rita Landry, who tearfully described her son's changed behavior after Melissa's disappearance, the nightmares, the drinking, the refusal to speak his wife's name. The most damaging testimony came from forensic analysis of Melissa's car. Investigators, using technology not available in 2002, detected minute blood traces in the trunk that matched Melissa's DNA. The blood had been cleaned, but cleaning never removes everything. The prosecution argued that Derek had struck Melissa during an argument that morning, had placed her body in the trunk of her own car, had driven to the remote section of Bayou and disposed of her remains, had then driven her car to Opelousas and abandoned it to create the appearance that she had left of her own accord. The extra miles on the odometer matched the distance to the disposal site and back to Opelousas. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that blood in a trunk could have innocent explanations, that coincidences happen, that suspicion is not conviction. Thomas Arsenault pointed out that there were no witnesses, no confession, no direct proof that Derek had harmed his wife. He suggested that someone else could have taken Melissa, that Derek was being blamed because he was the husband, because statistics show spouses are often responsible, but statistics are not facts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on one count of second-degree ending of life. The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Melissa's family wept with relief. Derek's family, including Rita, sat in stunned silence. Derek himself showed no emotion, simply stared straight ahead as the verdict was read. The judge sentenced Derek Landry to life imprisonment, without possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution read a victim impact statement written by Emma and Tyler, now 17 and 16. They wrote, in part, "Our mother was taken from us when we were too young to remember her properly. We grew up with a hole in our lives that could never be filled. We deserve to know her, to be raised by her, to have her at our graduations and weddings and all the moments that matter. Instead, we have only absence and grief, and the knowledge that the person who was supposed to protect us was the one who took her away." Derek was given the opportunity to speak. He declined. The case of Melissa Doucet Landry closed officially in November 2016. Her remains were released to her family, who held a funeral service at the same church where her memorial had been held 14 years earlier. They buried her in the cemetery behind the church under a live oak tree with a headstone that read, "Melissa Marie Doucet Landry, 1979 to 2002, beloved daughter, mother, friend. Gone but never forgotten." In the years since, the case has become a teaching example in law enforcement circles, a reminder that cold cases are never truly closed, that families never stop searching, that sometimes justice takes decades but still arrives. Detective Angela Romero was promoted to sergeant in 2018, in part because of her work on the Landry case. Tyler Landry, who struggled with guilt over his father's conviction despite knowing it was necessary, eventually went to therapy and found some measure of peace. He graduated high school, attended community college, and became an advocate for families of missing persons. Emma moved away from Louisiana, changed her last name back to Doucet, and tries to build a life separate from the tragedy that defined her childhood. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have lived with the terrible knowledge that something is wrong but could not prove it, who have waited years for truth to surface, this story offers no easy comfort. It confirms that evil can hide behind familiar faces, that manipulation and control can masquerade as love, that silence and secrets can persist for decades. But it also confirms something else, that truth is patient, that justice can wait, that even when evidence is buried in dark water and time has eroded certainty, the truth has weight and substance, and eventually rises to the surface. Melissa Doucet was 23 years old when her life was taken from her on a humid morning in June 2002. She had dreams of going back to school, of doing something more with her life, of watching her children grow. Those dreams were stolen, but her memory, kept alive by a mother who never stopped searching, by children who never stopped asking questions, by detectives who refused to let her case gather dust indoors. Her story matters not just because justice was eventually served, but because she mattered. She was a person, a mother, a daughter, someone who deserved to live and laugh and grow old. She deserved better than the betrayal that ended her life and the silence that followed. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.